In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer. Amen. Please be seated. The room is closed and the doors are shut. Fear has settled in, filling the timber, the air, the atmosphere. The disciples are gathered there in retreat, their world having narrowed to what can be secured and managed, what can be held at bay for a little longer. And into this enclosed space the risen Christ comes, simply standing among them, saying, "Peace be with you." Peace arrives as a gift into a space where meaning has fractured, trust has been wounded, and everything they had hoped for has been called into question. And yet Thomas is not there. We are not told, but I think his absence is deeply significant and symbolic. Because many people find themselves on the outside, not present, not part of the team. Many people, when they hear of faith that others have, think, well, that's okay for them. They've got that sorted. It's not for me. Or I'm just not there. I've missed out somehow. Or I've got so many questions and doubts, I can't go there. So Thomas finds himself not part of this moment and alone outside by himself. And when he returns, the others say to him, "We've seen the Lord." But that's not enough for him. They carry a certainty that he can't accept, and he answers them honestly. "That doesn't cut it for me." Or, as the New Testament actually says, "Unless I see, unless I touch, unless I place my hand into the wound, I'm not going to believe." Now, this response is sometimes mistakenly understood as weakness, as if Thomas is holding out against what's obvious. But the point is here that others have been given something that Thomas has not received, and he refuses to borrow their experience as if it were his own. So there is an important integrity in his refusal to believe, because faith can never be based on the testimony of others. Faith can never be second-hand. It can't be inherited. It can't be caught like a virus. It can't be just gained by hanging around others who have faith. I wonder if that's a position you relate to, that you are in proximity, or you have good friends or those who you're close to who have a faith that you don't feel that you share, that is somehow you feel missing from your life or it doesn't make sense to you. This is the position of Thomas, and that's okay. Because what I want to talk about is that I think Thomas has a different type of faith, and it comes through a different path, but it's a path many of us, myself included, come this way. Reflecting on Thomas Rowan Williams, the great Anglican theologian and previous Archbishop of Canterbury, writes that his demand to see and touch Jesus is, quote, "a protest against unreality." It is a protest about giving in to easy questions, or getting answers to easy answers. Thomas' doubt here, in other words, is the refusal to be dishonest. And I want you to hold that in your mind and in your hearts as we then move to the next scene, and then what is astonishing about the next scene really hits home. Because we're told that they gather again 1 week later, and the doors are again shut, and again Jesus appears without warning, without even seeming to unlock the doors or knocking. The same space, the same fear, the same unresolved tension. But this time the narrator says Thomas is with them. Christ stands again and says the same word, "Peace be with you." And how is Christ going to respond to Thomas, this outsider, this person who said, "I don't believe," this person full of doubt and questions, who's not part of the gang? It's beautiful, it's poignant. He turns towards Thomas and offers precisely what Thomas had requested. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out. Place your hands in my side." How respectful is that? How beautiful that Christ simply respects Thomas's questions, Thomas's uncertainties, Thomas's doubts. He said, "Here I am. Make up your own mind." In this extraordinary gesture, Christ offers up his wounds for Thomas to reach towards and touch, not just shake a hand, but his actual wounds. This risen Christ who's still bearing the marks of crucifixion. And my thought is that it is the wounds which are the very means by which Thomas is drawn in. These marks of death and suffering and violence become a place of knowing. So I want to linger here, because these words in many ways are more confronting than we recognise. This invitation Christ offers Thomas is to come into contact with the woundedness of his own body, marked, open, bearing traces of violence. Put your hand in my side that was pierced, where the body was broken open, where blood and water flowed out. It would have been messy, it would have been uncomfortable. When Christ invites Thomas to reach out, in a sense that he's inviting Thomas to cross a threshold that cannot be then uncrossed. He invites Thomas to be in proximity with suffering, to be so close to it that the reality is no longer abstract, no longer just an idea. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. There's something almost unbearable about this, isn't there? The physicality of it. For to accept that invitation is to risk being changed by it. Because once one gets on the inside of violence, and experiences life, the fragility of human life, whatever form it might take, a whole set of questions get posed that can often just be put aside otherwise. Things become immediate and personal. We are often unguarded. And that's what happens to Thomas. He's no longer outside this event looking in. He's on the inside. And this is where faith can become risky, but also tangible. And as I said, for me, that's how my faith has really come to be formed. Through my encounter with the fragility and suffering of human life, where it has that ability to cut through all the other thoughts and doubts, and to just really focus and to think about, what is our life about? I wonder if in your life there's been a moment where you've found yourself, or many moments, where you've found yourself face to face, touching, embracing human fragility and woundedness in all its terror and agony and suffering. Let me tell you a story about someone else's story who has experienced this. In 1994, during the genocide in Rwanda, a woman named Immaculée Ilibagiza hid for 91 days in a bathroom, no larger than a wardrobe, together with 7 other women. 8 women in a wardrobe for 91 days. Outside, she could hear her family being hunted and killed. At times, she says, the men searching for them were so close they could actually hear the men breathing. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, no way to intervene in what was unfolding behind the thin veil of the wall that separated them all from violence and death. And in her memoir, entitled Left to Tell, Discovering God Amongst the Rwandan Holocaust, Immaculée writes of those days not only as a time of terror, but as a place where something in her was stripped back and exposed. The distance between herself and the reality of human cruelty was reduced to nothing. There was no softening, there was no explanation. And yet within that space of literal wall-to-wall suffering, she describes what for her was a slow and painful movement towards faith. For her, that a clarity emerged around faith in the midst of the horror, the fear, the anger, the grief, the unbearable knowledge of what was happening. And part of that for Immaculée was realising that if she allowed the hatred and violence of the world to take hold of her, of the Rwandan Holocaust to take hold of her, if she allowed it to cross over that threshold into her life, that she would be taken, and that hatred would grab hold of her. And this is the question, in a sense, that human suffering and agony puts upon us when we get up so close that we see it face to face. So she made a decision in that moment to pray, and to begin to pray for those who are seeking her life and the life of the other women. For me, this is a powerful story about an encounter with violence, being on the inside of human suffering, and in that place discovering a type of faith that is only really found in those types of encounters and those types of horrors. They're paradoxical though, aren't they? Because in those moments, one can also come to the view that the universe is entirely empty of God, that there is no goodness left, that there's no hope. And the same person may encounter horror in different times and at one point think there's no God, and at another point think, I see Christ here in the midst of it all. That's the paradox of faith. And that's fine to have those conflicting experiences, those questions, those doubts, those uncertainties. So Thomas in that moment, I believe, found himself drawn to Christ and says, my Lord and my God. As I've said, this has also been my journey, obviously in entirely different circumstances than that of Immaculee's. But certainly I have a faith that is more doubting and questioning than faithing, believing. In fact, when I was at Regent College, there's about 1,000 students there. I was doing my master's degree. I hadn't prayed for about 3 years. I'd pretty much given up believing in pretty much everything. Certainly given up believing in hell. And that stuck, thankfully. And I was talking with a good friend I'd made, Derek, who's a New Zealander, and I said, Derek, I've got the weakest faith of anybody at Regent College, Vancouver, because I question everything and I doubt everything. He goes, Matthew, it's the other way around. He says, you've got the strongest faith of anybody I've seen here, precisely because you question everything. Nothing cannot be examined and questioned and doubted. And literally from that conversation onwards, I saw my own faith in a different light. And about a year later, I was with my brother as he passed away. He was only about 41 years old when he passed away. And I was in the Netherlands working on my doctorate when we got the phone. He had been very sick for 7 years, but I got the phone call saying, he's not going to make it. You need to come back immediately. I raced back and got there about 72 hours before he passed away. And again, at that point, I had told my bishop back in Australia that I was never going to be ordained, that I barely believed anything anymore, and that he could just forget about me and whatever. But then, in the room with Mark, in those last 48 hours, a bit like Thomas, I found myself with this overwhelming sense of faith. A young man with 2 young children, he was going to pass away soon, and he did pass away. And there was something sort of not irrational, but something non-rational about it, not something that you can't explain. But it was being in touch with that tremendous tragedy of his death. And I was like, on the inside of it, literally holding his wounds, with my brother and sister and parents. And so that second moment, I had that conversation with Derek, and then that moment with my brother Mark as he passed away. That for me, what could be understood as times where, or moments where you could give up on faith altogether. I certainly had arguments against pretty much all the major doctrines of the church and stuff. But then I suddenly found myself with a faith that was strong and robust, but still allowed for the doubts and the questions and the uncertainties. That's what I'm trying to get at. Sorry, I'm emotional today. I don't know why. You probably say I'm emotional most weeks. Anyway. That's the sort of faith I want to talk about, because the church often just talks about the sort of faith that is, healthy, wealthy and good looking. Follow Jesus and all your dreams will come true. Or follow Jesus and he'll lead you to military victory, as someone says recently in America. Or faith that is, bumper sticker faith. Trust in God and all your worries will go away. It's all BS, to put it clearly. The sort of faith that I think is the sort of faith that we need to be embracing and talking about and speaking about is the faith that Thomas had, which has that personal integrity that is bespoke. It had to be real to Thomas, addressing the questions Thomas had, not of the others with him. And it had to, I believe, get on the inside of human suffering, because that's where he found God, and God invited him to be part of that. So this is a faith that goes hand in hand with doubt, and that doubt ensures that the faith never becomes superficial. It's a faith that can bear the weight of what we don't know. It's a faith that accepts there are questions without answers and experiences without explanations. It's a faith that knows that trust in God does not make us safe. And because of that, it's a faith that remains alive and attentive and open and curious. As I said before, it's a faith that can live with the paradox of encountering one situation and thinking that there is no God, and yet in another moment say, God is here in this place, and is happy with that paradox, with the mystery. It's a faith that is never settled, it's always on the move, shaped by what has been encountered and open to what has not yet been seen. It is a faith that draws us into conversation with one another and ultimately with God, who urges us to reach out, to connect, to get on the inside of human fragility and suffering, and to see that is where God is. Because this is the God who appears when we least expect it, in the middle of our wrestling with questions and doubts and uncertainties, and yet whispers, "Peace be with you." Amen.